All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Special District Association and Streamlined presentation of website accessibility and compliance. My name is Matt Clemens. I'll be your host today, and I'm delighted to have two experts in the field of ADA compliance. And I'll be introducing them right now. I think you got a little bio in the marketing pieces that went out about that. But for those of you who are just joining us today for the first time, I'm delighted to present Melissa Oakes. Melissa, wave, say hello. Say hello to everyone.
Hi.
So Melissa is with Spencer Fane, and they're a big law firm that actually oversees hundreds of special districts. And what's really special about Melissa herself is that she leads the team that oversees website compliance for those special districts. Now, what's really interesting too is that Melissa is based in Colorado, and Colorado is just a few years ahead of Oregon in terms of the date that they needed to comply because they have an additional state law that kind of brought the DOJ requirements forward 2 years, and it just took effect this summer. And so, Melissa, how many websites do you oversee for special districts specifically?
Right. So, and it's just, I just want to be clear, it's just our Colorado office. Spencer Fane is a nationwide firm, but this is just our Colorado office with this special districts group and this type of client. So, we presently manage ourselves a little over 120 websites for our district clients.
So poor Melissa didn't have to just deal with this with one website. She had to deal with it with 120. So there aren't many questions she hasn't dealt with. So we're really grateful to have her expertise because she really knows the nuts and bolts of this. And she's just years ahead in terms of, where we'll be in Oregon with respect to these regulations. We also have joining us today Stuart Tubus. Now, Stuart Tubus is the leading voice on ADA compliance in the country, in my opinion. He's represented Marriott, City of San Jose, like big public entities. He's actually dealing with two appellate court cases at the federal level. He's Harvard Law trained, MIT computer science. He knows everything there is to know, the deepest knowledge expert we could find to bring into the fold. And he's been a great advisor to us at Streamline and at SDAO. And so he's helped us create some of the handouts we're going to be giving you today and is really helping us see ahead into the regulatory environment changes today. So we're delighted to have these two experts. He's, of course, with Jeffrey Mangels, Butler, and Mitchell. They are, leaders in this area, and he and Marty Orlick have absolutely defined the space and been part of historic cases that basically helped define this in the space of public law. So today we've got an action-packed agenda, and we're going to begin with a little review of why it matters. I mean, obviously it matters to stay compliant with the law, but why it matters kind of beyond that. Then we're going to talk about what's new and the historical legal foundations. Like Stuart's going to get into kind of where all these laws came from, how they work, how they practically show up for districts, and then we're going to speak to kind of trends and enforcement around that. So like what's actually happening and like what's the actual risk to a district? Because I think that's very interesting. That's something we're watching a lot. And then we're going to shift gears. Melissa's going to show us how to get compliant. And then we noticed there were a lot of Streamline customers today. I mean, we had over 200 folks register for this. And we know that like 100 of you are on Streamline. And so if it's okay, we're going to just take a few minutes at the end to show Streamline customers what's coming, because the areas of PDF remediation are just particularly complicated. That was kind of the wrinkle that came with DOJ as it kind of went beyond websites. And so we needed to think ahead on how we're going to support you there. So we'll be showing a special preview of what's to come and some cool strategies to manage PDFs. If you're not a Streamline customer, you're more than welcome to check it out because some of the strategies you could even use in an Excel document when you look at how you're going to sort of strategize the compliance by 2026. So with that, we'll jump in. And Melissa, I'll turn it over to you to kind of talk about, like, in your experience, like, why does this matter?
Sure. Thanks, Mac. I mean, it matters for a lot of reasons. We have this slide that kind of bullet points it, but really, we want to make sure that everyone across the board is able to access information, specifically information on our district websites, regardless of where they are in life, if they have a disability, if they don't have a disability. It's very important. Colorado has really spent a lot of time focusing on transparency for our special districts, our metropolitan districts, fire districts, library districts, school districts. And so we have a lot of legislation that tells us exactly what it is that we need to provide information-wise for our districts, the documents and the information and materials. And so part of that is transparency, but then we also want to make sure that everyone is able to access and digest and read and use that information. So, and of course, compliance. We have our laws took effect in July 1, just a few months ago of 2024. And so all of our districts on Streamline are in compliance, and other districts are working towards compliance right now. And also, you know, one of the things that we really took into account when we partnered with Streamline 2 years ago is reputation. We wanted to be in front of this. We saw it coming. We knew it was necessary. And so we were able to partner with Streamline and really make all of our districts compliant well before the deadline, and continue to be able to address any new legislation or requirements that our districts have to meet.
Awesome. And so, yeah, so what's helpful is, like, Melissa, you kind of took this on, and you were 2 years ago where Oregon districts are today. You're like, oh man, this is coming. And, you know, do you find like that districts were even aware of those 2 years ago? Where, like, what was the response and how did it change as the deadline approached?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know about it until about 2 years ago. And then when I did start doing some research and realized, you know, what all was involved in being compliant, I was very happy to find Streamline because, you know, you made it so easy. It was all kind of, you know, one-stop shop in a package. So it was fairly easy for a lot of our districts, especially the ones that we manage. We really didn't give them much of much of a choice. We had been on GoDaddy before this. Our sites were on GoDaddy. And when we learned of all the compliance and learned of Streamline, we kind of said, you know, if you want us to manage your district websites, you know, it's going to be on the Streamline platform. So, but I mean, in this 2 years coming up against this deadline that we just had a couple months ago, there was a lot of education. There are other firms, law firms, management firms, accounting firms that do the same thing as we do, manage the district websites. And so there was a lot of outreach meetings, talking to those firms and also talking to individual districts that, you know, may be managed by the fire chief or, you know, an administrator or something like that. Some of them had an idea, most of them had no idea. I will tell you, in Colorado, there's still a lot of angst around this, just trying to get our heads around it, what's all involved. There's been some changes in the requirements as recently as spring of this year, so there was some need to kind of, you know, adjust to that. But yeah, I mean, and there's still districts that are dragging their feet on this, surprisingly, even though the deadline has passed. There are some that just don't see it. And I guess, you know, they will find out on their own when and if they ever get, you know, hit with a violation.
Yeah. No, thank you. And to those of you, Melissa, we appreciate your positive comments on Streamline, but I want to be clear, like, hey, Melissa's not paid to be here. But second of all, today's presentation is for all districts. So whether you're on GoDaddy, whether you have a WordPress site, whatever, like, the information today is universal. So, and the checklists and some of the great tools that SDAO have sponsored, like Check My District, work for all districts. So you all know we're very passionate about the subject, but you know, you don't need Streamline necessarily to you know, handle all of these things. They need to be met regardless. And what's nice is the regulations are universal. So we'll be speaking to that, and we'll be giving you a checklist today. Now, but speaking of, you know, the what in all of this, like, Stuart, can you tell us, like, what are these DOJ things that we're hearing about, and where do they fit in the larger ADA compliance sphere?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. Happy to be here, and thanks for that kind introduction before too. Um, I've been in this space for a long time. I actually never thought that me being a computer nerd from back in the day and tearing apart computers and programming would be of much help because when I first started practicing ADA law, we really didn't see website cases. It wasn't even clear whether or not the ADA would apply to websites. That was a long time ago. And over time, the law was, of course, clarified and it was made clear that the ADA does apply to websites. Websites do need to be accessible. There were a few seminal cases on that, dealing with Target as well as MIT, actually, coincidentally enough. And um, and so now we're at a new stage. We're at a stage in which the Department of Justice, which is the federal agency that is responsible for creating rules and regulations for enforcement of the ADA, um, has really stepped up to the plate and provided some clear guidance on what public sector agencies and departments need to do to be compliant. And so for a long time, it wasn't clear. For a long time, uh, eh, courts basically said, yes, websites do need to be accessible. No, we don't have clear rules as to what that means. And so in lieu of clear government regulations, we'll reference these WCAG 2.1 AA standards, what you see at the very top of this pyramid. And, those are rules actually that were created by the World Wide Web Consortium. It's a non-governmental entity. And and they were referenced by courts, but they weren't binding law until the Department of Justice stepped in and said that the WCAG 2.1 AA guidelines are is required for a website to be accessible. And it's basically a set of rules that outlines what a website needs to have. For example, an image on a website needs to have an alternative text description describing what the image is showing that's embedded in the actual HTML of the site, sort of behind the scenes. Um, and as it says here, the DOJ, it released new guidance on June 24th, 2024, and it provided a deadline for special districts and governments to comply with that. So we've got a bit of lead time coming up in the next couple of years to really focus on this. But the reason we do need to focus on it is, as Melissa mentioned, it's important for anyone who requires accessibility to be able to go onto a website, especially a public sector website that has critical information, and to be able to use it. If you're blind, for example, you're using screen reading software that will scan the page and read it aloud to you. And the website really needs to be compatible with that screen reading software. Um, and secondly, the ADA is binding law and it's enforceable through private plaintiffs who are usually disabled individuals who are bringing lawsuits when they encounter barriers to access. So a blind plaintiff, for example, might go on to a fire department's website looking for information, or a water district's website, looking for the latest rates, for example. And if the website's not compliant, that person can bring a lawsuit in federal court and seek attorney's fees and injunctive relief. Injunctive relief is a court order requiring the defendant, which would be the special district in this case, to make the website accessible. And you know, the risk of litigation here is very real. You know, I handle these cases day in and day out, and you know, they can present a really unexpected and sudden increase in costs, as well as you know, disruption to the organization. Sometimes there are class action lawsuits which can get very expensive and protracted. So that's one way of enforcement, is private plaintiffs bringing these lawsuits. There's a second means of enforcement of the ADA, which the Department of Justice itself can enforce the law through investigations and legal action. And we see that quite a bit. I'm actually dealing with two Department of Justice investigations right now for enforcement of the ADA. I find, you know, anecdotally that the DOJ's been increasingly focused on website issues and enforcement. And so, you know, it'll start with uh, a letter of investigation from the DOJ saying there's been some non-compliance and we need to investigate. Please provide all of this information or we'll bring legal action. And so, you know, these are very real concerns that I think everyone should be at least mindful of.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. And you know, there's now been an election, and there's a new incoming administration that has indicated it's going to do less, you know, less regulatory hardship on, you know, private sector, potentially public sector. You know, do you think there's a decreased risk of enforcement here? Like, should special districts be less worried than they were maybe prior to Tuesday? Like, how do you think that's going to change the landscape?
Yeah, well, you know, the private sector enforcement, which I think frankly is most of it, that will not be changed by administration at all. Individual plaintiffs, you know, ordinary citizens who are not government employees can still bring litigation as they see fit to enforce the ADA. And then separately from that, you know, it may be the case that the Department of Justice prioritizes this issue a bit less with the new administration. I think time will tell on that, but my hunch is that there will still be some enforcement efforts, and it's still something you've got to be concerned about either way.
Yeah, okay. So we have this sort of impending new deadline from the Department of Justice for enforcement in 2026, but their guidelines, you know, we've said have been kind of nice in the sense that they finally bring clarity to so many of these gray areas like PDFs. Now, you're saying what I'm hearing you say is that districts in Oregon, like, we need to be thinking about you know, this now, not even waiting for DOJ because of private enforcement. And I know that, like, the statistic you provided that ended up in the white paper from the National Coalition on ADA said, like, some maybe is like 6 to 7% of districts in the United States have actually faced some kind of remediation request, action, or other thing, and that it's actually more widespread, and then, like, districts don't talk about it because they kind of quietly settle out. But then you also had kind of the trends with the ADA actions in 2023 that were sort of analyzed. And what I thought was really fascinating is that of those cases, 90% were filed by 10 firms. Like, can you speak to this? Like, what are these, like, people that just specialize in this? What's going on?
Yeah, this is what we see actually quite a bit of, is that there are a few firms and even a few plaintiffs who are basically repeat players in this field. And you know, when a new lawsuit hits my desk because someone's reached out, they've been sued, you know, I can almost always recognize the players on the other side. So, you know, these certain attorneys, Pacific Trial Attorneys, Manning Law, for example, they file quite a bit of these lawsuits, and some of the plaintiffs themselves have filed hundreds, some of them even in the low thousands of these types of cases, and you know, the law allows for that. The law specifically provides for plaintiffs to bring lawsuits to enforce the law here. it was a law written and passed under the original Bush administration. And the theory was, they didn't want a, a government agency or set of agencies solely responsible for enforcement of the law. So they'd let individual plaintiffs enforce the law by bringing lawsuits. And so you do see some filing.
Interesting. And what else was really fascinating, and I think particularly worrisome to districts, is that like 3/4 of these were targeting smaller entities. Like it used to be that you just go get the state and, go get the honey pot, but now like they're hitting little things, little guys.
Yeah, we see this quite a bit actually. It, you know, size doesn't seem to be any sort of protection. You don't really, hide from these types of cases.
Yeah.
It's the same thing in the private sector. If you're a large corporation or if you're a small mom and pop business, it seems like you're just as much at risk for these types of cases.
Yeah, and like I know I had a friend who's a doctor and he's a dermatologist, and he had a little patient testimonial on his website, and he got one of those letters, never went to court, so it's not counted in these stats. But it's in California, same Ninth Circuit, same circuit as covering Oregon, and he had to pay $30,000 just to settle it. Like, is that normal? Is that crazy? And I mean, he's just a single doctor with his nurses, and he had a website, and he had one patient video that didn't have closed captioning. Like, is that normal, or was that kind of an exception?
If he had hired me, it probably would have been a better outcome. But um, they can be expensive like that, and it's not uncommon for small, solo practitioners in the medical field or small mom and pop businesses. I can't tell you how many cafes or restaurants that I've helped deal with these types of cases. And yeah, it's something that you know a pound of or an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's really that old adage applies uh, to the nth degree here.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that was pretty interesting, like in the breakdown of platforms, so these are the ones that made it all the way to federal court. A lot of them targeted the most common platforms outside of Streamline. So Streamline roughly powers a third of all special districts in Oregon, and but behind that is WordPress and then Wix and Squarespace. And so we were kind of surprised to see these now sort of, and comprising half the actions. I think that was worrying. And then most shocking was this on accessibility widgets. So here, like
Mhm.
organizations are going and buying these little things that, put the little universal accessibility symbol on there, and then they are getting targeted. So what's going on with these accessibility widgets?
Yeah, I see this all the time. It's probably the number one question that comes up. Basically there are a slew of companies, this is a good list of them, that will offer to make a website accessible for like $30 a month or something, just by applying some software that will go in and try to make the website accessible. They often use, buzzwords like AI to market it. And, they're not bad, but they're basically just woefully insufficient to fix the problem. What I tell clients is that they're okay to take care of some of the low-hanging fruit to fix some of the easy issues on a website, but they point blank do not make a website ADA compliant. They don't make a website fully accessible. I don't think it's possible yet to do that with some simple overlay software like this.
Right. Because then the people with disabilities would just use that, and then they wouldn't need any remediation.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, don't just basically don't count on something like this to fix the problem.
Yeah. So one of the big things that, Melissa, you and I talked about this extensively, is like, in Oregon, people aren't required to have websites. And so I'm sure some people on the phone, on the Zoom call today are thinking, well, great, I'm going to take down my website and solve the problem. We can't have an ADA violation if there's no website. And, this brings up the thing about transparency. So like, Melissa, like what kind of did we learn in Colorado, and like what happened?
Right. So, so in Colorado, and I sorry that I don't know Oregon law. I understand that I believe there is not a requirement for districts to have websites, and Stuart or Matt can correct me on that. But in Colorado, there are certain criteria for our special districts, that certain special districts are required to have websites. And so our deadline again for compliance was July 1 of 2024. And this is for all government entities. So not just our special districts, but, municipalities, cities and counties, state, everyone across the board. And so one of the things that we saw happen, not necessarily for a special district, but for a county government, is that they started taking down all of their documents, because now we're talking, the website itself may have been ADA accessible, but we have this added thing that they kind of rolled out some new rules for us on PDF or materials that were uploaded to the website. And that those also needed to be compliant by July 1 of 2024, even though we only had a few short months to digest and kind of pivot on that. And so what we saw happen with some county governments is they just started taking down the materials, and these are materials that they've been putting up there for years. So I mean, there's thousands of pages of documents. So that was one of the reactions that we saw, and obviously that is not the intention of any of these pieces of legislation. We want transparency, and we want people to have access to this information. We have the ability to archive documents. We do have a hard deadline of July 1 of 2025. Our legislature did give us a year's grace time to ensure that all of our websites and materials are accessible. But we do have, and DOJ provides, and also Colorado law provides the ability to archive some documents. And what that means for us in Colorado is if a document was created prior to the July 1, 2024 deadline, we can place it in an archive section of the website. And then if somebody does need an actual remediated ADA accessible version of that document, they can reach out to us and request that, and then we will submit that for professional remediation and provide that document to the requester once it's remediated and is 100% accessible.
Cool. So it provides a nice workaround. I know in California, Cal Fire and others, they just like literally had the digital equivalent of a book burning when AB 434 passed in California in 2019. And so that like was a big wake up call. And we were so glad to see in the federal law, like a provision. So you can keep all that old stuff up there. You just have to mark it as archived. And we'll talk about what that means. And that is a huge relief. So you do not have to sweat every single PDF. And you've got some time to get sort of ready for that. Now, let's open up for some questions. I see some questions coming in, and I'd love to have either Alex or Yenny, who are also joining me today from Streamline, to maybe help us call out some of those questions so our experts here can respond. So either Yenny or Alex, please jump in.
Yeah, so it looks like we have two questions specifically asking, and I'm not sure if Melissa or Stuart have the info on this, but if it is a requirement specifically in Oregon to have a website for special districts, is that something either of you can answer for our attendees?
Let's see if Jennifer is on the call. Jennifer Quisenberry, I'm going to promote you to a panelist. This is why it's so great. I'll give a plug to SDAO, to Frank Stratton and that entire team. You are so safe as districts. You're stronger together because you're part of SDAO, and they do a fantastic job with membership benefits, legislative affairs, all of that stuff. So Jennifer, if you're joining us, I'd like to direct that question to you. if you've got to put you on the spot and get that official answer from SDAO.
Yeah, no problem. It is not a requirement in Oregon to have a website. So we don't have to worry about that.
Thank
Yes.
you. Yet. Yeah, that's the question.
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. And then it looks like there's also a few questions specifically about the accessibility widgets that I know we just mentioned. Are there any that you recommend that's going to offer the best protection for districts?
I can field that. You know, I've looked at all of them, and it seems to me like there's a lot of, you know, dynamic changes in that field. I can't really see one that really stands out over the others. There seems to be, you know, a lot of duplication. Um, you know, I know that Audio Eyes widget seems to be rather popular, but you know, my experience in dealing with them is really from the legal perspective, handling a lawsuit where, let's say, a client used one of those widgets and relied on it to make their website accessible, thought it made their website accessible, but it didn't. So I don't know. I can't really recommend one over the other. My main message is just, you know, don't rely on that widget option.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing, you know, like I'm saying it, but it's just not sufficient.
Yeah. Okay. On some of these others, we're actually going to cover what is the Oregon deadline. We can speak to social media, Kathleen, in those questions that you had asked as well, and Eric Kennedy. We'll get into that a little bit more. And then as for the plain language description of the DOJ guidance, we're going to talk about the small entity implementation guide and the checklist we made for you today that's going to be easy. So I'm going to shift back to the slides, then I'm going to break for some more questions in a few minutes to get back to it. All right, here we go. Back in business. Now, one of the things that Melissa helped us make, which was really awesome, and we helped adapt it to Oregon just for you today. We made a checklist, and this checklist has the link to that guide that you were just asking about, Kathleen, for small entity compliance, that plain English guide, as well as this. And Stuart worked with us to go through. Is actually pretty helpful. We even looked at like demand letters and stuff of like what gets demanded of districts in these lawsuits. And we made a list of actions, both one-time actions and ongoing actions that you can do that really reduce your risk enormously. And in our view, like make it possible for you to say, okay, we are compliant. And these are things that are important today. The only part of this that doesn't apply today is the PDF attachment portion, in that it's still like you could still face you know, some issues, you know, from a private party, but like it's not going to be enforced by the Department of Justice until 2026 or 27. And we'll talk about what those deadlines are too in a minute. But the rest of this all applies. So and it applies today. It is the law of the land, as we understand. So we have a QR code for you. We also have a tiny URL, so you can type it in and you can get this. You can download it as a PDF. You can follow it along. And it's nice because there's links to some great resources here. And so let's talk about this. So like, should to remediate or to not remediate a PDF in Oregon? Melissa, that is the question. Can you help us here and understand what remediated thousands literally, and so tell us, what about these?
So this goes back to what I spoke with a little bit ago about being able to archive. So for us in Colorado, our deadline was a little different. Oregon has some time, you know, to look into this. So the deadline for Oregon is if the document that you are putting on your website was created after the DOJ deadline of April 24, 2026, then you do need to professionally remediate that document. You cannot archive it. And so in Colorado, I also spoke to the fact that we have very specific requirements, documents and materials and information that we must provide on our website. So if it is a required document, so for us, it's like a budget or an audit, or election results, that sort of thing. It's best to remediate those as well, because they are legally required to be on your website. We do have some districts that like to share other information, like maybe a service plan, or maybe some covenants, or some other information that maybe isn't required by law, depending on what it is. If it's a document that isn't going to change very much or hasn't changed very much, so like a service plan or maybe some covenants, our recommendation is to remediate it, because it's kind of a one-time thing. It's not a document that's changing all of the time. So in Colorado, we remediate those documents. But if it's something, I don't know, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, something that we would archive. I mean, one of the things that we did for archiving is our old budgets and our old audits that we know are going to be swapped out here in a very, well, this month or next month. Those we actually archived because we realized that a new one is going to take its place here very shortly. And so we took the archive option on that, rather than having our district clients pay for professional remediation of a document that was only going to be up for another maybe 2 or 3 months and replaced by a new one. Obviously, the new ones are going to have to be professionally remediated because they are a required document, as well as they were created after the July 1, 2024 deadline for Colorado.
Mac, I think you're on mute.
I am. Okay, less is more in terms of speaking. There have been some questions around the deadline, like the number of people served versus like the deadline for all special districts. So we will follow up with a clarification on that. We're getting conflicting messages there. So I'm actually gonna, Stuart and I will put our heads together and just make sure that this is accurate. And if there's any adjustments to these slides, we'll send that out. Perfect. Now just give us a quick refresher. What is archived content, Melissa? Because you were kind of giving some examples, but in the DOJ's definition, what do they consider archived?
Right. So obviously you have your create by date, which is really kind of governing whether it's something you can archive or not. If it's created before that date, you can archive it. If it's created after that, it cannot be archived. It does need to be ADA accessible. If it's kept only for reference, research, and record keeping, and it's kept in a special area and it has not been changed. So, for our example, right? So our budgets would be, or our audits would be reference, research, and record keeping. It's kept in a special area. It's on the Streamline platform, so that's a little bit different. We do have a handful, like 7 district sites that we manage that's on a different platform. And so for those archived contents, we just created a separate page and put those archived documents, linked to those documents on that page with the required language for our state addressing archived content. And of course, these things have not been changed since it was archived. So if you do archive a document and you go in and you make a change to it, it's no longer something that you can archive. You now need to pull it out of archive and provide it as an ADA accessible remediated document.
Cool.
And I'm seeing a question in the comments, just so everyone knows, remediation basically means making it accessible.
Okay, awesome. Great. So then speaking through to this too, there are some strategies, and as this deadline gets closer for the PDFs, we'll get into some of this in more detail. Now, note, the deadline for DOJ enforcement is listed there. We're going to confirm that the application to special districts. I've actually seen it 2 different ways. I've seen the population split, and then I've seen a call out for special districts that puts them in the small group. But then that's on ada.gov, but then I've seen it differently in the statute. So we've been through this before. Melissa, we had a situation where the law literally said one thing, and then the Office of IT was saying another, and then everyone was confused, and it led to knockdown, drag out fight in one of the breakout sessions. So like it's anyway, sometimes these things aren't clear. So we will double check all of those and make sure the deadlines. But there's still, as Stuart pointed out, like you do want to have a plan for your document remediation. And we're actually recommending people are starting to use archiving now, because then it protects you against inaccessibility around the document, because you've already described it as inaccessible as an archive document. And so you get like, it's just a very different situation where you're not like, it's not an out of compliance thing, it's in compliance thing. So I wouldn't wait on those, but you don't need to speed remediate all your PDFs right now. That wouldn't be, necessary. Although I would, if you're a larger district, I would definitely consider it. Now there's two ways that you can remediate. So Melissa, leaves nothing to chance and leverages, professional remediation. And there's a couple gotchas with this. So for those of you who are really like kind of on the frontier and leading and you want to be fully accessible now, like Adobe Acrobat has a check for accessibility and it has its own little checker. The only problem is their checker's not WCAG standards. So they're not quite the same. It's pretty close. One of the gold standards is really Common Look. There's like Vera PDFs and others that you can use too that check to the WCAG standard. But freaking Acrobat, and it's still a mystery to me as to why, but like it doesn't actually comply with the standards. So like Melissa, you dealt with that a lot, like just having to, go through those two things. And yeah, and a lot of the Common Look remediation tasks, like there's things that are sort of annoying that you have to go through. But what we did to like straighten this out, because Melissa and I actually gave a presentation in Colorado in the early days that was called Journey Out of PDF Hell or whatever it was, like a guided thing. And like and we hired Sean Jordison, who's like the PDF remediation expert. He's literally called the accessibility guy, and he has the channel. And he was like, here, we'll take your hardest PDFs and we'll fix them live in real time. And like people's heads like exploded. He's like, you just changed the tag to coordination on this. And everyone was like, oh my God, I like am just learning about this and my head is exploding. So we decided that's the word. We literally put everybody into PDF hell. We didn't take them out of PDF hell. So we completely approached it differently after learning from that webinar. And we're like, okay, what we're going to do is hire Sean to like show us how to make an agenda from scratch that's totally compliant. And then people can get a cup of coffee and they can sit down and they can just like walk through the steps and get there. And it takes you all the way from Word. So I'll play like just 20 seconds of what we had Sean do.
In today's video, we're going to learn how to make an agenda accessible to WCAG 2.1 AA standards. Then we're going to upload it into Streamline and run a scan for accessibility to validate that it is in fact accessible. Welcome to the Accessibility Guide channel. My name is Sean Jordison, and let's jump right in. There are many rules and regulations to consider.
Anyway, so it's kind of cool. He like will take people from Word. And then for those people that had more complex documents like tables and other things, he walks through that whole process too. So what I really like about this is like, I don't want special districts who often have limited budgets to spend another dollar on stuff and plugins and more software and all of that. And so it's pretty great about this is it's like a DIY to get a fully compliant document. So these will be included and they're also in the handouts as well. So you don't have to deal with that. Also, there's the small entity implementation guide, which is a really great it's about like the most non-hieroglyphic kind of like interpretation of what actually needs to be done. I think it's built down in our checklist, which is easier, but something to keep an eye on. So kind of wrapping up here before we sort of shift into the Streamline segment and kind of look at some sort of products and how to deal with this. Some things we're watching for and we'll be talking to you more about is DOJ enforcement. And so like what is happening and like how's the incoming administration going to approach this? Are they going to extend the timeline? We've got some time for this. And how is that working versus what's happening today in the courts, as Stuart was pointing out? We're looking at new technologies, like how can AI and other things make this easier, but still appropriate uses, not just sticking a plugin and calling it a day, but like making sure that we're fully solving these problems. Looking at responsibility for liability, like who's responsible? Is this the website vendor or the districts themselves? Historically, it's been the public entities, but now there's a movement to try to shift it to the web developers. You know, if you have a building and they forgot to put a wheelchair ramp on it, you know, that contractor's in big trouble. That's kind of how we view it at Streamline. And I know we've added now indemnity up to 50K for any district if there's any accessibility issue on it. So we're putting ourselves kind of in the firing line so that our districts never have to worry about legal risk that might pop up. And then transparency is like, will districts stop communicating online out of fear? And the answer to that is no, we must not. The Streamline it serves only special districts for the sole purpose of helping you tell your story. So we hope if anything comes out of today, that there's less fear around accessibility and more empowerment, you know, using the list, making sure that you have the information on how to stay compliant, and that we will continue to update this with the latest regulations. We'll work with Jennifer and her team, dig in, make sure we're providing you the latest and greatest and keeping you safe together. So with that, I'm going to open up to some Q&A, say a big thank you to you for taking time out of your day for doing this. And then Melissa and I are going to jump into a little demonstration of the technology. Of course, we're here to help. My email is mac@getstreamline. Yenny, who's joining our panel as well, she's talking to all of you, and she and Hannah are talking to every single district in Oregon about this. If you're on Streamline, just to make sure that you know you're covered, get you on an onboarding appointment, make sure that your scans are all run, your policies are up to date and posted. You need to have, you know, accessibility statement on your website. Melissa's firm helped us write that. And you definitely want to be using something robust like the dashboard, which we'll be demonstrating in here as well to do that. And, you know, I can thank Stuart for the concept of the dashboard. It was at Mendocino Farms over a sandwich that Stuart and I hatched the accessibility dashboard as it is today. All these pieces, and Lindsay Hardy and our Lara, who you probably know, and our product team have really taken this to light in terms of how to break down all the different required pieces. It's very cool. So we'll dig into that in just a minute, but let's get some more questions out there. So Alex, fire away.
Yeah, looks like there's quite a few questions specifically around which documents on your website need to be accessible. So is that every document? Is that only the required documents? Can we speak a little bit on that? And also specifically if documents on internal websites need to be accessible as well?
Melissa, Stuart.
Well, I can take, sorry, go ahead,
ahead,
Stu.
Melissa.
I was just going to take the first part of that. So any document that you have uploaded and public facing on your website needs to be accessible. So if you put it up there, it either needs to be archived and then remediated if the request comes in for a remediated ADA accessible copy, or it needs to be an ADA accessible document. So if it's up there, it needs to be accessible.
Yeah, I'll echo that. Anything that's publicly facing should be made accessible. There is this exception for archived content, older content that's just there for reference purposes, and there's a few requirements that need to be met for that to apply. And so there's an exception for old archived content, but otherwise everything that's up on a site and publicly facing should be accessible. There was a comment about internal documents. So if it's a document that's not available to the public, let's say it's on an intranet, only available to employees of the special district, there's not a requirement under the ADA that be made accessible. The caveat to that being, if you have an employee that is disabled and they're making a request for a reasonable accommodation, then you may be you want to talk to an attorney basically about that, about whether or not it applies. There's a sort of gray area analysis there.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, super helpful. Okay, so switching to a little bit more of an external question as well. So there's a few questions about, if you're sending emails or if you're posting on social media, do those items need to be accessible as well?
Yeah, I get,
Give it on that one. If you want.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead, Stuart.
No, please, go ahead.
Yeah, so a couple tips, like just pragmatically, this is why it's a great idea to reference back to your website from social media. Like I know in Streamline, you can take content and you can post it onto social media. Social media will write alternative text and tags, and you can add alt text in social media to describe images. But here's what I recommend to people. Just make sure that what you post, like let's say a water district wants to post an infographic on, its community impact. It's definitely something you just want to write in the text of the post right underneath it so that it doesn't rely on being able to see the infographic to know what content is in there. If you serve 10,000 customers and your rates, went down 10% this year, you can put that in the text of the post in addition to the graphic, and then you don't face any accessibility issues, because in that case, a person with a disability will have a reasonable accommodation and some alternative formatted content. The other thing you do is point back to your website, and if you have an accessible website, it's there, it's covered. Is there anything to add on that, Stuart?
Yeah, I'll just say, from a pragmatic perspective, looking at legal risk, I think your social media posts are much less risky than your website. So if both are inaccessible, and I get, like, let's say 100 lawsuits come in the door for me to defend, 99% of them are going to be relating to the website and not social media posts. So much better to focus on the website just from a pragmatic risk mitigation perspective.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Digging through. Alex, what's the next one you've got on your list?
There was one. Looks like there's a few questions. There's one from Colleen McNally that I believe I've heard Melissa and Mac speak on before, which would be really helpful, is, if you have content on your website that isn't accessible, can you have a accessible PDF paired with it to meet the standard? So if you have like a really pretty infographic that you want to keep, but you pair it with something that's accessible, is that meeting the standard?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say you've got a flip book. Yeah, absolutely. If you can just take a PDF and make it accessible, that works. Another thing you can do, it's not always as pretty, but like you can just put the content in the content of the page, and then you provide it an alternative format, and then you can have literally an inaccessible PDF, and it's no problem. The problem where people run into issues is like we had Colorado district. It was not on Streamline, but they had posted a wildfire evacuation notice as a PDF, and because of the way it was set up, or all in caps or something, the poor person, like, it was literally a person with a disability came and shared this, and they were like, I had to read a wildfire evacuation notice one letter at a time, and the whole thing was read to me like E, B, P, T, like. And that's how but they didn't have any choice because they had to read it. And so anyway, stuff like that is like why you just having it available on the web page, HTML, at least in Streamline, it's going to be compliant out of the box, so that as long as you describe the content that's in there, it'll work great. So yeah, absolutely. That's an alternative to a flipbook. And you can ask that flipbook company, do you adhere to WCAG 2.1 AA requirements, per ADA guidelines? And they will be able to answer that question, and they should answer it affirmatively. And if not, that's something you can give them a little heat over for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Mac. And then it looks like we want to get a little bit more clarification about the requirements around sending PDFs via email. Do those need to be compliant?
I would say yes, if you're providing this information to the public, to, your customers, then it should be accessible.
Yeah, it's my understanding as well. Awesome. Videos, yes, there are closed captioning requirements. Stuart's advice to us has always been, you can use the automated captioning, but you just make sure, like, give it a once over as a human to make sure those captions are accurate. And if you need to, you can go in there and fine tune them if there's a keyword or something that it's not getting quite right. But if you have videos that have like maybe a noisy environment or the closed captioning is not accurate, then you'll want to make a captioning solution available or have somebody either write them in or use a captioning service. Yenny, I think, oh wait, did you raise your hand, Yenny?
I did. I just wanted to say, if you do have any questions, I'm going to put my email on the chat. That way you guys are more than welcome to email me with any personal questions you may have about your Streamline dashboard.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I see some chat going back and forth on those. Yes, Kathleen, I would recommend a Facebook page. I think that's never a bad idea to have that. Oh, Carol, what about a link to a GIS map? Oh dear. So there are some things like GIS boundaries and stuff. Those are tough because even making something like that accessible can be difficult. One of the ways we've approached like district boundaries, like if there's a district map, is just to encourage districts to write a plain English description of what their boundaries are. So like we go from this river to this highway to this street to that street. It's a 4 square kilometer area. Like that is a way to describe what would be seen in the map, and that could be a pretty good workaround. Stuart, any thoughts on GIS? These are like mapping systems.
Yeah, I haven't seen it come up a lot in litigation. In general, I find that plaintiffs are really focused more on, basic usability of a site. But yeah, I think Mac, your suggestion is a good one. The threshold question is how best can you make this accessible to someone who can't see it?
Yes. Okay, great. Someone asked about story maps too, so I just sent them my email address. I actually want to see that software and then offer an opinion once I've seen it. Okay, cool. Now shifting gears to those of us for the Streamline customers that want to sneak peek into what your dashboard will be looking like once it gets flipped on. It's pretty awesome. So what you have currently is your pages being scanned, and Streamline will go ahead and automatically flag issues on your pages that might be causing problems and guide you on how to fix it, which is awesome. But what we've now added is a whole nother set of tabs. So I'll walk through them quickly. We're going to work from the right to the left. So what's really neat is that your settings will now be updated, and things like Stuart has drafted the website accessibility policy and statement, and you can review and approve, and then your site will automatically build out a website accessibility statement. It'll also add a 1-800 number for support, like ADA ADA accommodations. And the reason we added this is we realized districts were fielding calls that were ADA like cries for help and not realizing what they were and maybe not taking them seriously and documenting it. This goes through our accessibility team and our support team. So if somebody has a problem with your website, specifically an accessibility issue, our accessibility team will record the call, document the accommodation that was provided, everything that Stuart told us to do to keep you safe from a lawsuit, basically keep us safe from a lawsuit because we have to pay for it. So we're like, if we're inheriting all that responsibility, we've got to do that. And then we built a form for them to fill out if they have a request. And this has the latest and greatest statement that makes sure that your district is staying completely compliant. So that automatically gets done. There's some other cool things. You can assign your accessibility officer, so it designates the contact person. What's also cool is it'll also manage a view for all your reported issues. So anything that the public reports, like lawsuits, start with a request for an accommodation. And so what's really neat is this will get you can now monitor the issue while our team addresses it, and that's all built in. The other thing too is embedded content. So anytime you put in a GIS thing like an iframe or a script, or some people, they had embedded a MailChimp newsletter widget, which was not accessible. So even Google Maps, like they don't have an iframe title. I don't know why. Google, has the author of HTML working for them and they still didn't square this away. Just don't ask us why, but your Streamline thing will catch this and make sure that you go through and review the different items. And it'll even take you to the pages that have detected issues and have you review. Your video compliance. So for those of you who have embedded videos like closed captioning, it'll go through and check all those and automatically enable closed captioning for your videos. So you don't have to do anything with it, which is pretty cool. And it's automatic there. Your images, we now have the GPT Vision library, which is really cool. And so like the new descriptions like are so great. Like a giant robot looms over a lone figure amidst dystopian city ruins. Like that's so much better. The old way was this: red tulips, green greenery, and a pen. Actually, oh no, I guess this is all using GPT Vision now. So we've upgraded these so that now you don't have to write the alt text as much. You just need to review it, but it'll automatically label all your images with a much higher level of fidelity. And then file compliance. This is going to be blood red and very frustrating for a while, but don't worry, we've got some new tools and things on the way. What is really badass about this is that it will show you all of the things that are wrong with the PDFs, and it'll give you like a breakdown. And we partnered with Common Look and we actually installed the Clarity Scanner for free. So you do not need to buy any software to check this. It'll check all your PDFs for you and it'll even give you options. One thing we built in, if you have like a strategic plan or something that's really important, you can actually request PDF remediation. We set up a deal with Common Look before all the prices got raised. We set this up with them in 2022. So you can actually fix any PDF for $7 a page. So if you have some complicated thing that an external graphic designer made for you and you're like, I don't want to deal with it, it's this 2-page thing, $14, it'll be back automatically uploaded into your Streamline site and just fixed, and then it's accessible, and you even get a certificate of remediation that gets stored in your site. So that's pretty cool. You also have the ability to just go ahead and put it in the content vault. So you can just take it down and just say, I know it's not accessible. Here, go ahead, provide access to the original file, save it. And then what's really neat is like, if you go to that page, like it'll show you where your pages appear. I think, hold on, this one's down. There we go. Then it will add a little like stop on the way to say, oh, here's an archive file, here's what it is to access it, and it gives them that form to request the archived copy. So yeah, I know that's a little bit complex, but just to let you know that Streamline basically has an interface that'll keep track of all your PDF files, track them by views and downloads, so you can start with the most popular stuff first, and an interface to either remediate them yourself or send them off for professional remediation, all built in. So that's like a pretty revolutionary thing. Then, of course, as Stuart said, already the law of the land is you want to have your pages fully compliant. So if there's any issues in here, you want to be at 100% and you want to get your dashboard to green. Now, you can get your dashboard to green without fixing all your files. You can get it just by archiving the things that are archived, and it'll take care of it. And you can do it by and if you want to fix the PDFs too, you can do that. So that's a very, very fast overview. I will stop there and open up for any remaining questions from our crew.
There is a question about, is there a certain timeline or time frame that someone has once it's been requested to be remediated to get it over to the person?
I open that to you, Melissa, Stuart. I don't think there is. I think it just needs to be described in your internal policy, and you just need to follow it. So it's kind of like a public records request. Is that your understanding as well, Stuart and Melissa?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any specific time frame there.
Yeah, for us, we were kind of going by the same deadlines that we have for a Colorado Open Records request. Of course, if we do it through Streamline, the turnaround is between 5 and 10 days, I believe, depending on the complexity of the document. So usually what we end up doing there is if we receive a request for remediation, we will submit it through Streamline for remediation and then reach out to the requester and tell them that it has been submitted and give them an idea of when they might expect to receive it. Then once it's received back, we will email that back to them.
Thank you, Melissa. Sandy Chapman also asks, we are a small road district with limited budget. How much of our website needs to be ADA accessible? We put our monthly meetings and financial records in PDF form. Do we need to have all of these ADA and caption on our Zoom meetings?
Yeah, I mean, if it's new content that you're generating and it's generated and provided after the deadline for compliance, then yes. Even if it's not generated after that deadline, it still has to meet all these specific archive requirements to be archived. So short answer would be yes.
Yeah. And Melissa, this is your districts, right? In a nutshell, they're little.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you work with limited fund districts all the time, right? I mean, this is your specialty, or these emerging districts, a lot of metropolitan districts, right?
right. And so one of the things that we actually did internally for us is using those videos that we have from the accessibility guy. We actually created some very simple templates. So for like meeting agendas, any type of notices that we need to put up, we've created accessible templates of those. And so we use those internally. So we don't have to send those out for professional remediation. We hold back the professional remediation cost for those things that are coming from third parties. So maybe an accountant is giving us a budget or some complex document like a service plan, which is going to have maps and charts and all sorts of stuff. That will send out for professional remediation, but we did identify some simpler documents that we have created those templates for. So that helps to cut down on the cost. Because once you have that template, you can just use it over and over again and not have to worry about the remediation cost.
Yeah.
And does a transcript of a video count as closed captioning, or is closed captioning a requirement solely?
No, the video itself does need to have closed captioning, but the good thing there is that if you have a transcript, it's a lot easier to add closed captioning to the video. And as Mac mentioned, there are some software options to create closed captioning for a video now that will be really helpful and will do 90% of the work for you. You just need to kind of go through and make sure it's accurate.
Yeah.
Okay.
One exception I'm familiar with that is like, if it's like a monologue, just somebody speaking, then a transcript suffices, because it's basically, you're not losing anything by not having the overlaid things. But yeah, I agree with Stuart. And it's so easy to do closed captioning now. Like the tech has gotten really good. So.
And then the last thing about videos, just real quick, if it has just music with a bunch of slides and pictures on it, does it require to describe the video and what is happening in the video, or is it appropriate to just keep the video as it is?
If there's no spoken audio, then you don't need to, have a description of it. It's really just you need closed captioning for any spoken audio,
Okay.
at least right now.
Wonderful. And is there a requirement for closed captioning of a Zoom public meeting while it's happening?
I'm not aware of any requirement for that.
Yeah, I think what some folks have done is they turn on automatic transcription in Zoom, so it'll do live captioning, and that's pretty helpful. And I think if you're a really big district, consider like a live captioning agent, so like a human that'll basically make sure that it's accurate, kind of like they do for live television, like a stenographer. But yeah, I think if you are doing live broadcast, I would enable the live captioning, and then you can always tidy it up for the recording later.
Yeah. I'll also add that, if a special district receives a specific request for some accessibility service, like let's say sign language interpreter or something, then there's a duty to consider that request and provide some reasonable accommodations to ensure effective communication. So if you receive a specific request, then you should deal with that specifically.
Awesome. And then I'm sure, Melissa, you'd be willing to share those templates with some of those Oregon districts that are curious to see how you've been handling it.
Yeah, sure. Maybe what I can do is I can send that on to Streamline and you can send them out to the folks that would like that.
Absolutely.
cool.
Yeah, we could put it on our resource page too. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, Yenny, how many more questions do we have? I know we're a little bit over time.
I know. Yeah, I think we just have, but do you know?
Action packed. There are a lot of questions. Oregon districts.
I think the last one is, do you happen to know if the accessibility requirements are going to apply to documents issued as a result of an FOIA request? Not sure if anybody can answer, but if not, you can also just email me and I can get back to you.
Yeah, so a FOIA request, like a Freedom of Information Act, Public Records Act. What I understand with those is like you can ask what format they need it in and you can provide it. So like if it's an Excel file of, a bunch of data, then you can just send if that's what's being requested, you can send that and you just put a little sentence at the end. Like if you need this in an accessible format or in a different format for accessibility, please let us know. And then you can, then you can address it at that time. If you are to publish it to your website, however, then you'll want to address accessibility.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, I want to give a special thanks to our guests who volunteered their time today, Stuart and Melissa. They are, again, experts in the field, just such a wealth of knowledge. Melissa being, years ahead of where the other states are and having personally done it on 100 plus websites, and Stuart for leading the way in terms of defending public entities against claims. Your voices are so valuable, and we thank the hundreds of districts literally that have joined us today for this conversation. And we hope that we can continue to work together to make the lives of districts easier, and most importantly, for you to tell your story. You as special districts in Oregon, you are providing an essential public service. You're doing great work, and we want the world to know the great work that you're doing. Unfortunately, many communities don't even know that special districts exist. So we hope by giving you this information today that you feel confident continuing to share your story and doing all that great work. We thank our host today, Jennifer Quisenberry with the Special Districts Association of Oregon, and all the great work that Frank and that team do every day to make the lives of districts easier. And we hope to see you again in the future as the deadline approaches. I'm Matt Clemens from Streamline, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Take care.
Bye, everybody.